This is actually the 7th real estate report that we've done. We've looked at everything from global investors to real estate in the digital age. But what I'm most excited about this year's report is it's the first time that we've had a European element, so really delighted to be able to share that with you. When we did our first report back in 2013, the world was a very different place. David Cameron was the Prime Minister in the UK. Barack Obama was in the White House, and the UK was a core member of the European Union. Global capital was flooding into all types of commercial real estate. Retail, particularly shopping centres, were attractive, and residential property, particularly in the UK, was very much an outlier. How different things are looking today. Not only are we seeing unprecedented political change and uncertainty, the real estate sector has been turned upside down, with some traditional asset classes sidelined in favour of beds, sheds and meds. Now, we looked at sheds in our report last year, so this year we decided to look at beds, and in particular the future of urban living. We polled over 200 real estate professionals. They look after portfolios worth over £3 billion. And we also interviewed some key players in this sector, both in the UK and Europe, and I know there's companies there that you'll recognise. And actually, in the biggest poll that we've ever done, we asked over 6,000 people across Europe for their views on where they lived. So I just want to start with a look at what the real estate professionals are saying. I mentioned politics, and of course the big issue challenging us all, or particularly us in the UK at the moment, is Brexit. And it's all down to this man here to get us a deal, or not, as the case may be. Slightly worryingly, only 34% of our real estate professionals thought that Boris Johnson would do a good job as Prime Minister. And I'd be fascinated to hear what you're all thinking about that in Europe. We are really starting to feel the heat in the UK. 73% of our respondents saying Brexit is now having an adverse impact on investment in the UK. And if you look at market sentiment in the UK generally, it's been weakening now for a couple of years, which is no surprise as we have the threat of a no-deal Brexit looming ever larger. When we focus in on London, again, 57% of our real estate professionals think that London is overvalued. So perhaps that means there are opportunities in other European cities because capital needs to go somewhere. Well, every cloud has a silver lining, and 46% of our respondents favoured Amsterdam as an alternative to London post-Brexit. You don't need me to tell you this, but Amsterdam has great quality of life, fantastic infrastructure for financial services and good transport links. So not a surprise then that it's actually overtaken Paris, Berlin, Frankfurt as the alternative to London post-Brexit. When we look at favoured asset classes, distribution and logistics was on top, although not quite as hot as it was last year. What I think is really interesting about this chart is it really shows the emergence of the bed sector. The next 3 places we've got retirement living, PRS and healthcare. Offices have dropped back to 6th place, although actually up 10% on last year. And I've been saying this for a few years now, but we have retail right down at the bottom, although that too has made a small step in the right direction, perhaps reflecting some talk we hear in the UK that retail values have bottomed out. So to really understand what's driving this demand in the bed sector, let's take a look at what our consumers thought. Over 1,000 of them in each of these cities. Places that we chose for their vibrant rental markets, and not in the least because we've got a CMS office in every one of them. So ownership was still the preference. That was particularly the case in the UK, where we have a less established rental market. If you compare us, say, to Berlin, 85% of people there actually rent. But interestingly, the percentage of home ownership in the UK has dropped more over the last 10 years than in any other European nation. If we split it down by generation, it's really interesting. 72% of iGens think that home ownership is less important. And indeed, 56% of all of our consumers agreed with this. So I think times really are changing, and our home won't necessarily always be our castle. One of the big drivers of this is, of course, affordability. And it was quite shocking, but 67% of our consumers were either in debt or just about breaking even every month. So clearly, saving for a deposit is really hard, particularly with the way that house prices are going up across Europe. If we take Amsterdam as an example, it's a compact city, so housing stock is limited, which of course pushes the prices up. But I don't think this is a conversation just about house prices. And I really like this quote here from one of our interviewees. He talks about renting being the natural progression of the subscription society. We don't own anything these days. And indeed, on our panel last week in Berlin, someone said the only thing you actually really need to own is your smartphone. So why else do we rent? All-inclusive offering, not needing to worry about repairs and maintenance, and of course flexibility. Interestingly, when we broke this down by city, it was Londoners more than anyone else who wanted this all-inclusive offering. When you think they have the longest commute of any European capital city, no surprise that they wanted that hassle-free approach. Interestingly, it was of least concern to Amsterdammers. So the challenges to renting. Unresponsive landlords, again particularly an issue in the UK where our model has been based on a buy-to-let one. And I think that's where institutional landlords will really make a difference, because with build-to-rent comes more professional standards, more consistency, and indeed the scale to invest in technology that can really enhance tenant experience. Another concern was rent controls. 72% of our consumers favoured rent controls, but it is strongly resisted by the real estate sector. It's a difficult one because even economists agree that if you push rents down, developers might stop building, which then limits supply. So it's difficult for governments who look to the private sector to help them solve the housing crisis. Interestingly, again, this was of least concern to consumers in Amsterdam, where I know you have a very established market which has rent controls at that lower level, so maybe they're actually working. What was really interesting was looking at whether real estate professionals understood what consumers really wanted from their homes. Well, everyone agreed that the most important thing was superfast broadband, but we were a little bit out of sync in a few other areas. So, for instance, the real estate professionals overestimate the importance of good transport links. And perhaps in today's mobile society, it's not all about location, location, location. We underestimated the importance of recycling and energy efficiency, of leisure amenities. And my favourite, and actually it was the biggest gap of all, was over permission to keep pets. The other thing I just wanted to touch on as well is the importance of community. This came out really strongly in our interviews and was also high up on the wish list of our renters. The UN actually estimates that by 2030, 60% of us will live in cities. But urbanisation can lead to isolation and disconnection in society. So there are two particular subsectors that I think are really challenging this. First of all, co-living. This is the collective in Canary Wharf in London. It ticks all of the boxes. It's all-inclusive, great services, transformational technology. But what I think really sets it apart is the way that they use their shared space and their events programme to really bring about that sense of community that we're all looking for now. At the other extreme, we have retirement living. And this is a little bit of an untapped market in Europe. And yet 61% of our consumers said that they would be prepared to rent in retirement. Demand is getting higher, demographics would suggest that, but supply is low. So no surprise then that of all of the bed sectors, it was retirement, actually it's later living, I think I'm supposed to call it, that was most hotly tipped by our real estate professionals. But the issue is finding the right product. This is an Audley retirement village in the UK, where they've created a sort of country club self-contained village. And we had a bit of debate actually on our panel in Paris as to whether this was actually the right product, and would retired people prefer to live in the community mixed in with other generations. So it'll be interesting to hear what the view of that is in Amsterdam. But regardless of which aspect of beds that you're investing in, the thing that really comes out is shown in this quote here. And it's that promise of secure and stable rental income. It's resilience to the economic cycle. Because, of course, wherever we are on this crazy journey, we do all need to have a roof over our heads. Thank you.